Welcome to the Create More Value podcast, sponsored by Fortuna Advisors, the boutique shareholder value improvement advisory firm. Create More Value is a series of conversations with senior executives, board members, investors, and other experts that have overcome challenges to create exceptional value for their companies. There are many ways to drive value, so we cover a wide range of topics. I am the host, Greg Milano, founder and CEO of Fortuna Advisors, and I hope you enjoy the conversation as much as I did. Hi, everyone, and welcome. I'm thrilled to have you join us today for this LinkedIn Live event. It's the first one, and hopefully we're going to do more after this. Whether you're tuning in live or catching the replay, thanks for being here. We really appreciate it. My name is Greg Milano. I'm the founder and CEO of Fortuna Advisors, and I'm joined by my partner, Marwaan Karame. As a quick introduction, for those of you who don't know us well, Fortuna Advisors helps companies rethink how they allocate resources, how they make decisions, how they really get the people throughout their organization to create more value. And over the years, we've worked closely with many CEOs and CFOs on aligning the interests of their people with value creation, which has pretty profound impacts, as we'll discuss today. Today's topic is the core topic that we're sort of deeply passionate about, building a value creation framework that really works, that really, so it creates value. Too many companies still rely on incomplete metrics like EPS, EBITDA, free cash flow, which is probably the worst, or ratio-based measures like EBITDA margin or return on invested capital. And all of these have some good attributes to them, but they're all incomplete, and they wind up driving misaligned decisions, which is a problem. In the next 45 minutes, we'll walk you through, why the right performance measure is the foundation of any value-based framework, how economic profit changes decision-making, and some real examples of how it's worked in practice with some quotes and stories and so forth to try to make it as real as possible. We're going to spend 45 minutes today covering something that we could spend hours covering, so we'll try to be brief, but feel free to ask questions or follow up with us afterward. We'd like to really be helpful in this regard as much as possible. So we start by thinking about helping people get better insights so they can make better decisions. And the better insights comes from measures that actually track value creation better than traditional measures. And the decisions come from people using those measures to make the decisions. And they can be all the down and deep in the organization, operating decisions that are made at a low level, or it can be the strategic resource allocation at the top of the company, which for big companies is the most important thing. Strategic resource allocation is the allocation of capital, innovation money, marketing money, and other important resources to their best and highest use across the organization. And when people don't have the insights they get from a true value-based management framework, they often get it wrong. Over half the companies we meet are investing more in their weak parts of their business than they are in their strong parts of the business that can have the potential to create more value. Be like Warren Buffett buying all the stocks he thinks are going to go down instead of the ones he thinks are going to go up. So with better insights and better decisions, we get better behavior. And better behavior is really what we're after. We find when you link incentives to value creation, you align the behavior much better than if you only use this tool in planning and decision making. When you really align people's behaviors with value creation, you get more value. And we'll show you the results of our research as we go through this. Better insights, better decisions, and better behaviors leads to better performance for the company, for its investors, for its employees, and for all of its other stakeholders. So I've mentioned economic profit. Let me define it now for you. And it's really simple. Profit can be defined different ways, but let's just say profit for now is the way most companies look at their P&L. And all we're going to do is we're going to subtract one more cost from that, and that's the expected return of the investors on the investment they've put in the company. So instead of just thinking about that as some vague, they expect some return on capital, we're going to turn it into a cost. And once we subtract that cost, what's left over, positive or negative, is economic profit. So now we're taking growth, margin, and capital productivity into account in one measure, and it correlates with value creation so well that we can say when it goes up, it's good, and when it goes down, it's bad, which we can't say with a lot of other measures. And that really clarifies things a lot. Now, some people try to get this completeness by having a bunch of different measures, but that often leads to confusion. 3 measures get better, 3 measures get worse. Is it good or is it bad? There's really nothing balancing the balanced scorecard, if you will. And so this is really the tool that you need in order to get a clearer vision, of value creation. Now, the core of what we're going to talk about today is based on an article that we published a few years ago called Driving Outperformance: The Power and Potential of Economic Profit. It appeared in the Journal of Applied Corporate Finance. And shout out to my colleagues that helped on this. The work was led by Jeff Green, who used to be a senior advisor of Fortuna Advisors. He's at RSM now. We also had involved in it Alex Cortolo, who did a lot of the research. She's now at Redwire Space, and Michael Chu, who is our head of our manager of thought leadership. The premise of the article was we studied all the companies we could find that used some form of economic profit in their incentive plans, and we looked at their relative performance to their peers and to the overall market. But we decided to also interview a series of managers and get their insights, and we're going to share some of that with you today. When we look at the actual research, it was outstanding. On average, the companies in the study outperformed the market by 7% a year on total shareholder return, and they outperformed their peers by almost 5% a year. And that's really a significant, source of value creation, if you will. Some people look at it and they say, well, 7%, that's great. If you think about, the market earnings, say 10%, an extra 7% is a real lot. And just to give you a sense of how significant that is, we put together this little example. Imagine you had a company worth $1 billion at the start, and it grows at the market rate of, let's say, 10% a year for 5 years. So it grows from the gray bar to the blue bar. That's great. What does an extra 7% a year look like? Well, it looks like another $580 million of market cap at the end of 5 years. So that 7% is really quite profound in terms of what it compounds to. And some of the companies in the study have been using this since before the year 2000. So they got over 20 years of performance using this, and you can imagine compounding on average 7% a year for that long period of time is really impressive. So it's we proved here what we've felt for a long time and what was studied by others, including Stern Stewart, the EVA company back in the 90s. Companies that embrace this kind of a framework right through to incentives on average outperform the market and outperform their peers. Now, in the article, we quoted Don Sharon, who was then chairman and CEO of Kimball Electronics. Very sadly, Don passed at far too early of an age since then, but I still wanted to get his quote in here because he was so insightful. He said, many people just dip their toes in and fail because they don't go deep enough and stick with it. This has been a decades-long journey for us. I talked to many CEOs, and I'm convinced that our approach is the best for decision-making, incentives, and for pulling together culture and strategic execution. And I think that's just such a great statement because it's not just about financial math and financial incentives. It really changes the culture. It really gets people thinking and acting like long-term committed owners, which is what we're really after when we're trying to change the culture. And it really affects execution. You can develop great strategies, but if they're not executed well, they often don't really result in the kind of outcomes that you want. This really pulls strategies into the organization and really encourages great execution.
Yeah, I think to your point, Greg, and really Don's point, when done right, economic profit naturally drives behavior we associate with the true ownership culture. And I think years ago, Greg and I, along with our partner Frank Hobson, developed a list of 5 traits of ownership culture to make it clear how people should behave in this new paradigm, which was based on really what we've observed over the years of companies that adopted economic profit. The first that comes to mind is spend money like the money is your own. Um, a lot of times people are managing to budgets, and with that, they end up either spending up to their budget, even though they may not need to, or worse, there are investments and opportunities they should capitalize on, but they don't because their budget says that they can't this year, and so they leave it for the following year. And so one of the key traits is spend like the money is your own. The second is extreme prioritization. So it's not only about doing the right things and prioritizing the right things to do, but it's also about thinking about the things you should stop doing. And that's something that you get when you're looking at this metric and utilizing it to think about making acquisitions or investing in R&D and some of the other long-term investment considerations. The third is willingness to fail. And what's really effective of this measure is the fact that it does give you a full picture of where value is being created or destroyed. And when you do that, there's a certain confidence that people have in taking risks and making bold decisions where they might not when they have all these other measures that are perhaps conflicting in what they should do. So willingness to fail is critical. The fourth is doing more doing and less talking. This is one where people end up taking more action, and instead of setting up meetings that are meant to then set up the next meeting, what you'll find is because you have this common language of value creation that everybody agrees upon and understands intuitively, they tend to take action faster, quicker, and the decisions tend to be better. And especially the fact that it reduces the number of meetings you do is critical. I know, Greg. I know you
Yeah.
spoke Scott Morrison once about
Yeah,
this.
my favorite comment on this was when I interviewed Scott Morrison, actually first on a webinar and then later on an episode of my podcast. He was CFO of Ball Corporation, one of the longest running users of an economic profit measure. They use EVA, and he said, just very frankly, EVA makes meetings shorter. The EVA goes up or it goes down. There are a lot fewer things to talk about, and a decision either makes sense or it doesn't. It's really pretty clear. So I thought that was just a great way to get people with more doing and less talking.
Absolutely, yeah, and you do see it. You do see it actually play out when people are implementing this. The fifth is it's about the long and the short term. So not only about making long term investments and thinking about the long term, but also meeting short term demands too, and getting rewarded for that. But it ends up being a really great balance when you set up the right incentive system to make that happen. One of the biggest things about adopting this measure is that it is really a cultural transformation. And because of that, you have to treat it like a change management initiative. There are basically four critical, I think, questions that need to be answered. And we're going to go through what those questions are and how one might actually go about answering. The first one is why do we have to change? That's a critical one. With that, the way you establish or determine or create the case for that is by creating a fact base that shows what will happen with inaction and why it's so costly and why you have to actually take initiative to make the change, providing better insights and then showing how to make better decisions, which really leads to the second question, which is what does the future look like? So strategically mapping out how to allocate resources, where to redirect those resources and capital to create the greatest amount of value, whether it's at the business unit level, the customer level, the product level. You need to set up a mapping and a guide showing people what the future looks like and really why they want to pursue that future and the benefits of it. The third is what's my part? Often, a lot of companies, I think, um, don't necessarily do a good job on this. And it's probably the most critical in terms of changing behavior and changing the culture of an organization. You really have to come with a pretty comprehensive communication and training regimen that not only describes what economic profit is, but also equips managers and employees on how to utilize it on a daily basis to make daily decisions. So that comes across by the way you do that is you not only have to provide the training, let them know what it is, but also show real life examples and actually have it applied real life time by giving them the tools, giving them process by which they can act on the measure. The fourth, which is the what's in it for me, really have people kind of perk up when they realize they're going to get rewarded on this. It lets number three be a lot more real for them because now they're asking, you know, now I know what's my part in this initiative. I'm going to actually get paid for playing that part. And so the fourth is setting up a good incentive compensation design that really encourages people to continually improve on this metric. Addressing, I think, number one, and I think Greg also spoke to this at the beginning, is that this measure really helps with developing better insights. And as Michael Jensen, who's the godfather of modern corporate finance, one of my favorites, He says if it's a ratio and if it's a performance measure, it's wrong. And although those measures are certainly do provide insight, they're not comprehensive in any way, because whether you're looking whenever you're looking at a percentage measure, you're really looking at the quality, but not necessarily the quantity or scale of a profitability that's happening when you just look at a percentage measure. So economic profit really encapsulates both revenue growth and return on invested capital, dollarizes that in a way that really sends a pretty clear signal. And as Jensen and Meckling had said, economic profit is the best flow measure of performance currently known.
So when we published the article, another person we interviewed was Joe Hayek, who was then CFO of Worthington Industries. He's now CEO. Congrats, Joe. He said, we adopted EVA to widen our aperture for making decisions, to increase consideration of balance sheet costs and asset intensity. If metrics are too P&L focused, you can get into situations where you generate strong accounting profits, but poor cash returns. And this was extremely relevant in one of our first clients when we founded Fortuna Advisors about 16 years ago. They had EBITDA that was increasing at a nice percentage clip for several years in a row, and their share price hardly moved. And so we studied the company and we went back and showed them that, yes, EBITDA was rising at a nice percentage, but actually their capital base was rising at a higher percentage. And so more than 100% of the benefits they were generating on the P&L were being consumed by the cost of capital. And that's why the share price hadn't moved anywhere. It's common for companies that don't care about the balance sheet for the balance sheet to become inflated and really weigh on the share price in ways that are surprising. And this goes back to my first exposure to this. If I go back over 30 years, when I was at the Grumman Corporation, we did a working capital improvement program that took out about $400 million of working capital out of a company that only had about $2.5 billion of capital in total to begin with. And almost dollar for dollar, that translated into market cap. I mean, it was really nice to see that happen. Almost nothing happened to the EBITDA. We just had less capital employed, and the share price went up. It was really a good early lesson for me. In another company situation that we were involved with a few years ago, they had a non-core manufacturing facility that was not being utilized that much, and so they went through a transaction with a contract manufacturer where they got rid of the plant, they sold the plant to the contract manufacturer, and they signed a multi-year contract. They paid a little bit higher price than what their cost was when they owned the plant, but they got the plant off their books, which was really good. And so, from their perspective, small hit to the P&L, big benefit on the balance sheet, and so that was really evaluating for them. And then the contract manufacturer wasn't making much on this contract because it was only a little bit above cost, but they now had all the capacity that was being underutilized. They could go sell. It was their business to do so. They could go sell to others, either competitors of our client or other companies in other industries, to try to fill the capacity, and they could make a lot of money on that when they spread the fixed costs out thinner. So it was a real win-win situation. A lot of value was created. Some of it, benefiting our client, some of it benefiting the contract manufacturer, and all the value came from filling up this previously underutilized plant. They found a more effective way to utilize assets, and in the hand of the company they sold it to, it was worth much more, and they got to share the benefits. So this leads to some really interesting things that you wouldn't necessarily think about if you're trying to always maximize the P&L. I mentioned Kimball before. Jana Kroom is the CFO of Kimball, and we quoted her in this research report. And I'd also like to point out that Jana joined me on the Create More Value podcast recently, and we had a really good session. It was just published last week, actually, so it's very fresh. She said when we wrote the article a few years ago, EP strongly influences investment behavior at Kimball Electronics. People realize there's no free lunch. I love that term. I've seen other companies that don't have a capital charge and they experience capital creep. And again, this is the situation where you're only focused on the P&L, and so the capital goes up a lot. Sometimes it happens in ways that are not driven by big decisions. It could be a customer that wants better terms, and when they ask for you to be able to pay you in 60, 90, or 120 days instead of 30 days, they're asking you to hold more capital on their behalf. And a lot of companies, they're afraid of losing the sale, so they just say yes. And that's one of the ways the capital creeps up. But Jenna told a really good story on the podcast, which I just want to relay quickly. If I have this right, it was soon after the first wave of COVID. There was a supply chain problem in many industries, and some of her customers turned to the company and said, "We'd like you to hold more inventory for us to protect our supply chain." Now, in a lot of companies, they would have said, "Oh yeah, sure, you're our best customer, you're great." But what Kimball did was they went and said, "Sure, we're happy to hold that inventory for you, but we need to earn a return on our capital." And the customers agreed to pay a little bit higher price so they would earn, an adequate return on their capital. And in fact, they actually created a little bit of economic profit out of it. And so by holding more inventory, they created more economic profit, which oftentimes when we are explaining economic profit to people, they say, we have a capital turn or inventory turnover metric, and so we don't need any economic profit to take care of it. But if you're only measuring inventory in isolation, then the only answer that's ever good is down, right? But in this case, it was better to have more inventory because they made more than enough profit to cover the capital charge and have something left over. And so, a real benefit of the one measure of EP rather than a bunch of different measures is it allows you to make those trade-offs and sort of come to the right decision, which is really important.
Yeah, I think a really good example of a company that did that and also just really embraced this ownership mindset is Varian Medical Systems. For those that don't know, Varian is a world leading medical products company for oncology, and at the time they were experiencing stagnant revenue growth and total shareholder return through about mid 2017, and they decided to execute on sort of this value creation playbook that adopted economic profit that would effectively encourage an ownership mindset and culture. And so, as a first step, by arming the CFO and CEO with a fact base that suggested that focusing on percentage measures like return on invested capital and margins was really coming at the expense of the growth, the company actually began focusing on growth, but not growth for growth's sake, but profitable growth. Um, and so that actually made them rethink about their capital allocation in a whole different way that they hadn't before. And during a 27-month period, I would say the company really was doing great things for uh, oncology and just for the world in general by treating cancer patients that they started off with 2.8 million cancer patients that they treated, and over a span of 27 months they actually increased that to 4 million worldwide, and that was really by shifting their capital allocation priorities from buybacks to more long-term value creating investments in like cash acquisitions and especially in R&D. That was actually pretty impressive. But what was even more impressive, in addition to that, I should say, was that resulted in just 2 years quadrupling the annualized revenue growth and then increasing their share price by 61% before getting a 25% premium when Siemens Healthineers acquired them towards August of 2020. So they actually doubled their share price within a 2 year time frame by really taking and embracing this ownership mindset, utilizing an economic profit measure to do that.
So just one more point on Varian, if I could. When we first started working with them, I mean, it was always a great company. They did great things for the people with cancer. I mean, what more noble cause is that? But when they were doing all those buybacks, when we took a first look at the company, they were earning multiples of their cost of capital. Their return on capital was very high. And without even doing any more work, we thought, giving two-thirds of the capital back to the shareholders can't possibly be the best answer. Investing in this great business had to be better. And they had double-digit growth for years, and then it was down to low single digits when we got there. And it was so great to see the growth revived, and it was really profitable growth because of the economic profit measure that they used. They called it Varian value added. Really had a huge impact on the company. It was really really great success by that management team.
Yeah, what's interesting about it is they didn't even have to make trade-offs between growth and return on capital. In that first year, they expanded on both, as well as their share price,
Mhm.
which is pretty interesting.
Yep. So another company we studied in the research that we published was John B. Filippo and Son, and Jeff Sanfilippo, CEO of the company, was interviewed and had a lot of great things to say. It was actually really hard to cull through everything to figure out what we were going to put in the article. But what we put was this: he said, "EP has driven enormous changes in the organization. It's gotten every function to work together, right? A common language, a common goal, common measure that's very complete and that everybody influences is really important. He went on to say, with EP, everyone now understands our strategy and executes toward common goals. Our culture has evolved from one of command and control to one of empowerment, particularly of department leaders. And that's just really great. In a lot of companies, they try to decentralize accountability. I'm sorry, try to decentralize authority, but because they don't also decentralize accountability, things kind of run amok and then eventually they have to re-centralize again. With an economic profit measure being used at the sort of business unit level and at the department level in a company, you can give people a lot more authority knowing that they have this accountability for a measure that's really, unyielding. It captures everything, including the cost of capital. That's a really common thing we see in companies, and Jeff really captured that really well. So when you look at most companies, when we arrive, they have a whole variety of different metrics. And when you look at different management processes, from how they set goals, plan, budget, how they measure performance, how they communicate internally and externally, how they look at acquisitions, capital budgeting. When you look at all these different things, including incentives and how they communicate externally in investor relations, you see a whole bunch of different measures. And the each process has its own set of measures. They're rarely the same. And so this creates a whole bunch of problems. First of all, it creates confusion because very few people, even in finance, but especially outside of finance, actually understand how all these different things relate to each other. Secondly, it leads to sub-optimization because, like I said before, three measures get better and three measures get worse. Is that good or is it bad? It's really hard to really know what's going on. And it really destroys accountability because, you make a capital investment or an acquisition based on net present value or free cash flow, and then you measure operating income or EBITDA, in business performance measurement. Where's the accountability for the amount they spent on the acquisition? It's not there at all. So what we like to see is to replace all these measures with an economic profit measure that's common to all these processes. And you don't totally forget about the other measures. They're still important drivers of performance, but the economic profit gives us something that kind of captures it all and tells us whether the net effect of what you're doing is good. It makes it simpler for people. Now, oftentimes people say, oh, we don't have the best financial acumen in our company. I'm not sure people will understand it. And yes, it's new. You have to educate people, you have to train them, and you have to do it in a way that's operationally focused and influences what they need to do with it, not teaching them accounting or teaching them economic theory, but teaching them practically how do they use this to make the day-to-day decisions that are important to their job. Once you go through the process of educating them and coaching them and getting them to, really use it, it actually simplifies their life. They're not worried about juggling five different measures. This one, if it goes up, it's good. If it goes down, it's bad. And that really simplifies people's life. Again, there's a road to get there. Marwaan talked about change management before. But once you get there, it's a much better place. It actually improves the financial acumen of people, throughout an organization. And I think it's something that, this commonality of a measure across all these different processes, is really really important. One company I just want to we didn't put in any case study on them, but I just want to call attention to because it's just a great example of this, and they're not even a client of ours to be fair. But Caterpillar, they use a measure called operating profit after capital charge, which is a form of economic profit, and they're a great case study. And a couple months ago, we published a podcast, again, the Create More Value podcast with Andrew Bonfield, the CFO. And on that one, he spent a lot of time talking about how they actually use that OPAC measure to make decisions. They measure it at a very granular level, and it really drives, an awful lot of the decision making that's led to really phenomenal success in the company. They've really done great with this. And again, that podcast is another reference point on how a company really uses this, to create value. And so the last thing I want to do is, if we go to the next page, Marwan, is we recently were recognized in a way that we're unbelievably proud of. The Journal of Applied Corporate Finance's most recent issue is called "In Honor of Fortuna Advisors," and every article in here is from Fortuna Advisors, or one was when I was with Stearns 2 years ago. But they're all from us. And there's one new article in here, the one by Jeff Green. It is the Dirty Dozen: Stifling Value-Based Management Diagnoses and Solutions, where he talks a lot about the obstacles people run into and what to do about them when they're trying to embrace value-based management. All the other articles in here were selected by the editorial team as some of the best work that we've done over the years. We've been publishing these and more articles in this journal going back almost 25 years now, and it was so great to be honored in this way. And we have a bunch of printed copies of it. So if anybody would like a free copy of this, just send an email to info@fortunaadvisors.com or fortuna-advisors.com. And please put on the subject line JACF, that's for Journal of Applied Corporate Finance request, live LinkedIn, so we know to direct it to the right person to get a copy of this sent to you. But I think you'd enjoy it. It's something we are very proud of as recognition of our thought leadership and our real contributions to the field over the years. And we'd be happy to answer any questions. I know we booked this to be 45 minutes, and we've gone through the content in about 30 minutes. But if anybody has any questions, we'd be happy to answer questions. Okay, well, it looks like there are no questions. That's fine. You can message us on LinkedIn, email us, send us anything that you'd like to ask us about. If anybody has any questions about how this applies to their company or what have you, we'd be happy to help. And thank you again very much for joining. And have a great day.
Thank you.
You have been listening to Create More Value, sponsored by Fortuna Advisors, and I am your host, Greg Milano, founder and CEO of Fortuna Advisors. I hope you have enjoyed this episode. Fortuna Advisors helps companies with strategy, capital deployment, business management, corporate culture, and incentive compensation, all aimed at driving top quartile total shareholder return and the equivalent for private companies. To learn more, contact us at info@fortuna-advisors.com.